Coming up on this special edition of This Week in Torrance, local first responders visit with us in the studio to talk about the recent tragedies from gun violence. We'll hear firsthand what it was like to live through one of the worst shootings in American history, and we also speak with an expert on active shooter scenarios and how to move past these nightmares. This and much more are just seconds away. You're watching a special edition of This Week in Torrance. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of This Week in Torrance. I'm Ben McCain. Thanks so much for joining us. On October 1st, the world witnessed one of the most horrific acts of violence in American history. A gunman opened fire on a crowd of concert-goers at the Route 91 Harvest Music Festival in Las Vegas, killing 58 people and injuring more than 500. And of those killed, 33 victims were from California. This is considered the deadliest mass shooting committed by an individual in the United States. And recently, on November 5th, a gunman opened fire in a small church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, a small town just outside of San Antonio, killing 26 people, making it the deadliest church shooting in American history. History seems to keep repeating itself. San Bernardino, Orlando, Sandy Hook Elementary, Virginia Tech, and Columbine. We invited two very special guests to join us in studio this week to open up a dialogue about active shooter awareness and hopefully to help us better understand what happened in these recent events, what to do if another situation like this arises, and how to cope and move forward from such tragedy. Thank you both for joining us here on this special edition of This Week in Torrance. On the set, we have Torrance Fire Assistant Chief Steve Treskes, who attended the concert in Las Vegas. He was injured and thankfully is doing well now. And next to him is Torrance Police Lieutenant Jeremiah Hart, who is a specialist in active shooter training and awareness. I'll start with you, Assistant Chief Treskes. You were there at the concert. You're here living and breathing. Tell us what happened, and we're so glad that you survived.
Thank you. Thankful to be here, and I appreciate the privilege to speak. Was at the concert with three other close couples of ours from the fire department, and also were several individuals from the Torrance Police Department that were with us at the concert. It was a 3-day concert, open air, in a venue that's on a blacktop, and we're just having a great evening of friendship and listening to country music. Our seats just happened to be in the back towards where the stationary bleachers were. And again, it was just a beautiful night. We were on the last singer of the venue. It was the last night of the concert. Everything had been going great. Lots of just a great atmosphere with all the people that were there. Very friendly, meeting lots of new people. And the last entertainer had just started his last set. It was the last set of the evening, last set of the concert. And he was about 2 songs in, and that's when it started. My wife and I were sitting next to each other. We were in the back again. It's called the chair corral. That's where you bring your own collapsible chair, and you can sit back there with friends and still be able to have a conversation while you still get to listen to the music. And we heard the initial shots fired, and my wife immediately asked, "Was that gunfire?" And I was hoping, it sounded like gunfire, but I was hoping it was a firework. I looked over towards the Mandalay Bay, because that's where it sounded like it originated, and I was just looking for some type of aerial display of a firework. Didn't see it, and then shortly right after that is when that rapid fire of the assault weapon that was used started going off. The volleys of the rounds started going, and you knew the instinct kicked in. It was time. We had to get to shelter. We were sitting like fish in a barrel out in the open, kind of contained in by 4 walls. And so my wife immediately got up and we started to run away from where we heard the screaming and the sounds. And as we were running, that's when we started to hear and see things that knew we were right in the thick of it. Could actually hear the whistling of the bullets as they were flying by us.
Now, was it loud, or did you think it was fireworks at the beginning, or what?
It was a distant, but it was a distinct, that rapid fire and that popping sound. I've shot on a gun range. It was definitely distant. It was being echoed off of all the structures. It was being echoed off of the venue we were at. So you couldn't really tell if there was multiple people involved or if it was one. I know one thought that just kept coming back was maybe 20 years ago in Van Nuys had the bank robbers that were just so brazen and just walking around with their body armor and their weapons and just casually walking around. That's the first thing that came to my mind was, oh, there's somebody that jumped the fence and is walking into the venue. But you really couldn't tell with the sound. It was a distinct, loud popping sound. But again, lots of confusion, lots of screaming, and that's when we started to make our exit. We started running, and we were running for the exits. As we were running, like I said, that's when we started to hear the bullets whistling by us. You could see them hitting on the ground, and there was a row of concession stands that we had to breach through some barricades to get out. You could hear the volley of the bullets hitting the sheet metal, and just rapid sounds of, it sounded like dozens of bullets hitting tinging off of the sheet metal. And when that came through, there's about a group of 10 of us that I didn't know who they were. We all dove in a pile on the ground, just trying to take cover.
And your wife was right beside you?
My wife was right beside me. She's a faster runner than I am, Ben, but she was a little bit in front of me, and she was on the ground also. That volley of bullets passed us, and we immediately got up and just kept yelling to run with our group that was with us.
So you friends, all the friends were together when all this was?
No, this is my wife alone because we'd been separated.
Wow.
A couple people were up closer to the stage. A couple were at the concession stand. So we weren't all together at that time.
So it was just you and your wife?
Just me and my wife at that time. And so as we were running, we did hit the ground. As soon as that volley of bullets passed us, we got up and started running through the concession stands. And that's when I started to notice I had a limp. And I felt a burning sensation on my lower back. And I didn't really want to know what was going on because I was still running, and the adrenaline is pumping so hard that you could have basically run with, it would have taken a lot to immobilize. You run with what you have. We ran towards the exit, and this is where I'm thankful for the brave individuals from the Las Vegas Metro Police, courageous and brave, standing there with their weapons drawn on an east gate, signaling everybody to exit out, that they had secured that exit. Because as a first responder, we train extensively with the Torrance Police Department, and we train on active shooters. You don't know if you're being ambushed. You don't know if there's active shooters waiting at the exits to hit the group as they exit. So to have that affirmation from the Las Vegas Metro police officers was calming. And we were able to exit out. We got out of the venue pretty quick based on where we were seated, and we just kept running. We ran for about a quarter mile. And that's when my wife found this poor Uber driver sitting in the middle of the street. She ran up to him, and you can imagine he sees hundreds, thousands of people exiting the venue. Asked him if he can give us a ride. My husband's been shot. Can you give us a ride to the hospital?
Shot 3 times?
I was shot once in the leg. I was grazed in my back, and I was grazed on my right shin.
Wow. So you went to the hospital. Tell us what happened.
Okay. So we got to the hospital fairly quick. I would say that I was one of the first few victims that were arriving. The hospital, they were aware that there was a shooting at the Harvest Festival, but they didn't know the scope and magnitude. Obviously, active shooters create just a nightmare for first responders on being able to catalog and keep track of how many patients you have, because everybody scatters. And that's the difference between a controlled mass victim incident where we can create treatment areas versus an active shooter where people are running for cover. So the hospital really didn't have an idea of how many patients. And so I walked into the emergency room. There was already another patient there. And I asked the nurse, I said, I've been shot in the leg. I go, I really am probably just going to need a bandage and a tetanus shot. I don't need a bed. You're going to have a lot of patients coming. And she acknowledged, we understand there's been a shooting, but we're a trauma center, a level 2 trauma center, and we'll be able to take care of you. Please get in the bed. It's our policy. So I got in the bed, and I didn't feel comfortable just because I knew there was a lot of people coming. I was trying to communicate. We had a lot of time for discussion because the patients hadn't started arriving.
So it sounds like you guys were one of the first people to get there.
We were one of the first at this hospital, Sunrise. The other one was the level 1 trauma center in Las Vegas. And just having a discussion with the nurse and the doctors in the room was, there's going to be a lot of people coming. I have no idea how many, but there was a lot of from what we heard as we were exiting, there's a lot of shots fired and just such a congested group at the venue. not more than 30 seconds, Ben, after talking to the nurse, the first traumatic full arrest comes into my room. And I asked the nurse, I'm not feeling comfortable. You know, I'd be more than happy to go sit in the hallway. No, we're okay, we can handle this. We're a trauma center. Another minute after that, another traumatic full arrest comes into the same room. And then the nurse turns and politely says, we may need your bed. Would you mind sitting in the hall? Absolutely not. And that's when I went to the hallway, and there was already probably 50 to 75 gunshot wound victims just stacked up like cordwood in the halls, in the rooms, all waiting to be seen. They had gone through a simple triage at the hospital, but there were what we would consider critical wounds sitting in the hallway. They just didn't have the staffing to give the attention needed at that time.
So now, it's my understanding you got up and you left.
Right. So I was sitting in the hallway, and again, we're just lining the walls. One of the things I remember was sitting across from a gentleman that he kept saying it felt like he was going to die. He was obviously he was in a state of shock. He was pale. He was having difficulty talking, and just kept mentioning, I think I'm going to die. I think I'm going to die. And he had body ink, so it was hard to see what kind of wounds, but I could see he had a little red ruby above his umbilicus. And I asked him, I go, were you shot in your abdomen? And you could see his abdomen was distended. Looked like there was some type of internal bleeding going on. He goes, yeah, I was shot in my stomach. And we know in our line of work, an abdominal wound is a critical wound. There's so many vital organs. So the nurse was down the hall, and I just screamed for the nurse. Yeah, this gentleman's been shot in his abdomen. And she was like, no, he hasn't. These have all been triaged. She came over, saw his abdomen distended, and then immediately put 2 large bore IVs in and called for the doctor, who came down. They put him on a gurney and took him right to surgery. And I looked up, and that was 75 deep in the hallways. And I looked at my little, I had a tiny wound on my leg, and they don't need me here right now. So I got up and I went to the lobby with my wife, and we just sat out there for a couple hours, just letting that hospital deal with what they had to deal with. And it was about 2 hours later, one of the hospital staff saw my wound and says, how come you're sitting in the lobby? And they brought me back in and then put me in a room. And really, being at the hospital, Ben, was more of a safe refuge for my wife and I, because so many different stories of what was going on in the city. We were hearing multiple shooters, multiple hotels that were involved with the differing reports that were coming in. Nobody knew what was going on. So we felt safe staying at the hospital. There was a heavily armed presence there from the local police department. And we were able to get to a room where got some observation, but they weren't able to treat me or do anything significant. And that's where we stayed for about 8 hours. And then finally I asked the charge nurse to sign out, because I knew they couldn't get to me. I was fine. I felt fine. I knew there was several other individuals that had way more critical wounds than I did, and I felt comfortable driving back. So we went ahead and signed out and drove back to UCI Hospital in Irvine, where they were waiting for me, and they treated me there and was released.
Wow, what a story. Lieutenant Hart, when you hear this, and also I continue to hear these reports about how the fire department and the police department work so closely together in Las Vegas, and I thought when I was hearing that, I know that the Torrance Police Department and the fire department, you guys work closely together. What are your thoughts on this story that he just told about how the police department, they were there to help at the very beginning?
Yeah, so with all the training that we do, especially the state of California for law enforcement combined with the fire department in regards to mass casualty incidents, one of the things the state of California did years ago was start a supervisor and management program for mass casualty events, specifically like active shooter. And in that training, as we're rolling the program out through the state and testing it, Las Vegas PD was there with us to give their insight and for us to give them some feedback. And with all the police departments I've worked with across the nation, they have one of the best plans, reactionary plans, for a mass casualty event like what we saw. And still you see the challenges like we're talking about today on trying to deal effectively with just the uncertainty and the clear number of people. Because these are criminal issues, but they're also medical emergencies. And that's why the two come so close together, which is why, especially for us, the Torrance Police Department and Fire Department work so closely together, especially with mass casualty events.
When this happened in Las Vegas, and then the shooting recently in Sutherland Springs, Texas, are people reaching out to the fire department and to the police department to say, hey, give us some guidance. We need some help here. We've never seen anything like this before. This could happen to our local community.
Right. We've seen, and especially with the fire side, both of us have seen another increase in people wanting to reach out for information and best practices of what they could do. You talked about the LA shooting, shooting about 20-something years ago, and really Columbine is what changed it for law enforcement as a whole, 1999. So we've been doing this kind of training and preparation for a long time. There's been some hesitancy on the private sector side to not even talk about it because inherently people feel it's really easy to do wrong and they don't want to scare people. But with so many incidents happening, so many employees at companies have questions. Do we have a plan? What should we do? We're seeing a lot more outreach to the police department, the fire department, for us to partner with them and the business district, business community, to give them options during these types of really, really horrific crimes.
And it's my understanding that anymore, they're not encouraging people to wait for law enforcement. If you can go after that person trying to do the harm, you're better off. I think statistics show you're better off if you can go after that individual. Is that correct?
You know what's interesting is we talk about, people know if somebody gets hurt, let's say they get a cut, and it's serious, they're going to call paramedics, but they're going to apply pressure until paramedics get there. They're not just going to sit there and wait. And we're starting to see the same approach now for these types of incidents with active shooter incidents. This is a race against the clock for police and for the fire department during an active shooter. The average active shooter incident, from the time the suspect starts shooting till it ends, whether he kills himself or the police get there and he surrenders or it turns into a shootout, it's about 3 to 5 minutes. Now, that's a very long time for an attacker to be able to move around and to start to shoot. About 3 to 5 minutes it lasts. The average police response time, somebody calls 911, dispatchers tell the police find the location, they get out of the car, they get to a place where the shooter is 7 to 10 minutes. So if you know that an active shooter lasts 3 to 5, and the quickest police response usually nationwide is 7 minutes, that tells us we rely on first responders, but people will always be first on scene. And that's why this education component is so important. You have to be, personal safety is a personal choice. Yeah. So you're always going to be first on scene, and that we're trying to equip people with the tools that they need to make good choices, and if they get hurt, to do self-aid until we can get real good medical attention to them.
Well, are there classes now that the Torrance Police Department or that the state or the government is offering where businesses can go in and take these classes, or individuals can take these classes?
Yeah, so there's so since '99, since Columbine, police departments, fire departments, the government has rolled out programs specifically for active shooter, but there's been a lot of maybe hesitancy to people to get involved. With everything that's going on now, there's a lot more interest. So yes, we have we work very closely with Department of Homeland Security with the Run, Hide, Fight program. They put out information, so as a business, if you're a business owner, you can go online and you get pamphlets and training pamphlets to give to your people. And we, through Business Watch, the fire department, the police department, work with businesses to tell them best practices for work, and we call it workplace safety because we want to focus not just on an active shooter or an active threat, but workplace safety as a whole, and give them some ideas and options of what they can do to prepare themselves for these types of events. So there are definitely resources available, especially here in the South Bay. The local police departments do a really good job of being available to reach out to businesses and schools to arm them with the information they need to be safe.
This is heavy stuff we're talking about, but I want to lighten it up a little bit, and I want Assistant Chief Steve Treskes to tell us about a recent situation you had with your family going to a hockey game.
Oh, so we were gifted with a couple of tickets to go to a fan appreciation night at the Honda Center out in Anaheim. And this was probably about a week and a half after the event, and took my 2 boys and my brother, and we were able to long line to get in, 4 lines of security checks, again heightened security after what had just happened, and not knowing what was going to happen with the metal detector. We walked up to the detector and just told I have a 12-year-old and a 23-year-old, put my leg through the detector, and it sounded, and the kids were getting a kick out of it, like, "Oh, Dad, you're like a thug. You've got a bullet in your leg." And so the lady that was working there, I put my leg through again, and it sounded, and she asked if I had some surgical steel in my leg, and I just gave her a quick. I actually just have a fragment from Las Vegas. We were there last week. I don't have a card. I don't have anything to tell you. They were very courteous about it. But it was funny, as I passed through, my son was behind me, and she goes, "You won't believe this. That gentleman just walked through. He was at the Las Vegas incident. He's got a bullet in his leg." And my son's, "I know, that's my dad." So we got a kick out of it. It was fun. But yeah, it's going to change my life. There's the bullet's still in my leg, and it's a decision that the doctors recommended keeping it in based on where it's located. It's not going to cause any future issues. And again, people ask, how are you going to deal with having a bullet in your leg with this guy that shot all these people? And I just look at it, and for me, it's every time I look at it, I just see God's grace on my life. So that's turned it into a positive, not dwell on it as a negative.
How has your wife reacted to this, and what about your children? What they could have lost their mom and dad.
Right. No, that's a great question, Ben. It happened so quick. My wife is doing so well. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's a difficult situation psychologically. Physically she's fine. Emotionally, there's a certain amount of innocence that was taken from her that night, and an increased awareness, which on one sense is a good thing, because we live in a pretty crazy world right now. There's a lot of bad going on, a lot of evil, a lot of wickedness. So to heighten that sense of awareness, I think it's a good thing, because we need to be aware of what's going on around us. She's doing great. One great thing, and this is kind of goes back, if I could share, is initially I've only done a couple interviews, because as first responders we don't like to draw attention to ourselves. It's not what we're in it for. I don't like talking about anything that I was really involved with. But I did make a pledge when this happened that there's 3 reasons why I would talk about it. One is to give glory to God for protecting, His hand of protection that was on my wife and I, and allowing us to get out of there safe along with the people that were with us. And His continued mercy and grace has been unspeakable. That's first and foremost. Second is to honor and just remember the other victims and their families that have lost so much more than we have, and to pay tribute and just let them know that we're standing by them. We're still praying for their emotional and physical healing. That's the second reason I would do this. And the third reason is our community. I can't tell you how much support that I received, my wife received, from our brothers and sisters in the police department, our city government, our community. The cards and well wishes and prayers, very humbling. And then we're all connected, right? There's several members in the South Bay community that were affected by this event. And when you see a picture or you see a news article on TV and you say, "I know that person," it makes it a little bit more real. There's a connection, there's a tangible relationship where people now, versus a shooting that happens in France or a shooting that happens in Florida, we don't have that tangible relationship where this is the South Bay, we're a tight-knit community. Now there's a little bit more relevance on what just happened. And so I have to have that sensitivity to want to share, because I know people are connected to this event through me. So
how about your children? What are your children?
Children
how did they
great.
react? And
children did great. When we were exiting the venue and we jumped in that Uber van, was able to have a little bit of downtime to pull out my phone, and I called them right away. I have a 23-year-old son, a 21-year-old daughter, and a 12-year-old boy. And I knew they were going to get phone calls, they're going to see it on the news. I didn't want them to have to worry about mom and dad. So I was able to get through to them as I was driving to the hospital. So that calmed them, gave them a little bit to chew on, hearing from mom and dad that we're okay and that we're going to the hospital and we're safe. After that, follow up at home seems to be fine. Occasional breakdown from my daughter, emotional, knowing that she may have lost her mom or dad at that event, but also thankful based on what so many other people lost, and just that perspective, So they're doing great. Ask my 12-year-old how he's doing. He'll tell me he's struggling a little bit with math.
Right.
And that's okay. That's where we want his head. Not too worried about it. So someday maybe he'll have a little bit better understanding of what happened, but that innocence is still there.
A question for both you fellas: your reaction after the church shooting in Texas. What went through your minds?
I can talk real quick.
Sure.
Initially was these still raw feelings in my stomach that I didn't realize I had. A little bit of nauseousness. Lost my appetite.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a crazy, like we mentioned earlier. We're just living in a society that there's a lot of evil and wickedness going on. There's a lot of hate for these senseless acts of violence, and it just leaves you with just kind of an upset stomach. I hurt for those families. And again, right away, along with the New York incident, the Las Vegas shooting, this recent shooting in Sutherland, Texas, just letting them know that we're praying for their emotional healing and their physical healing, and it's going to be a long process.
And Lieutenant, what were your thoughts when you heard about the church shooting?
I was crushed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's heavy. You see, you're at a concert, enjoying time with family and friends. It's special for us, and it's violated by this extreme act of violence. You're at a house of worship, and it's supposed to be a sacred place.
Absolutely.
And it's instantly crushed. And what you're hearing, especially on this side of the table, having just gone through this is a real event that has real consequences, that affects real lives. And so many times for most people, they don't have to go through something like this, and you see it on TV, and it's easy to change the channel, and you see people with the tears wiped off. And there's no blood, it's not dirty, and we forget how much damage happens from something like this. And for us in the job that we do in fire and police, internally we have trauma support teams. When we go to calls of maybe, say it's a baby not breathing for a medical call, or a shooting where somebody's hurt, or a traffic accident, we gather everybody together and we have trauma support teams where we have psychologists, and we talk about it and we work through those issues, because that's what you have to do to stay healthy. And so for the viewers, I think it's really important that there could be family members, friends of family members involved in this event that think, I'm just going to do it alone. I'm going to go through this. I'm going to be okay. It takes a whole community approach to really heal through an event like this. And so I just want to send a reminder out there that to seek professional help to talk about it, whether it's your church, whether it's a psychologist or somebody that has some background in that, is something that we all do, because that's what you do as a survivor. That's what you do to be resilient and to be able to move forward effectively.
What do you say to children? What do you say to children when things like this happen in Las Vegas or at church? What do you say?
Yeah, this is, and I'll jump in really quick, because everybody raises their child based on who their child is. So it's a very personal thing. There's no one-step approach for every child. If you remember the Sandy Hook shootings, which I was devastated.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
It's around the holidays. So many young, innocent children taken from family and friends. I mean, it's even difficult for me to think about now. My kids are fairly young, so even them knowing what Dad does, I'm not going to come home and talk about, hey, did you hear about the Sandy Hook shooting? I'm not going to talk to them about it, because I'm trying to gauge where they're at. 2 days later, my daughter, was really young at the time, brought me a bunch of snowflakes that she cut. And she goes, can you mail these to the kids in Sandy Hook? I'm like, how did you hear about that? So kids, if it's playing on the news or friends at school, they hear and they know. So if they have questions, we need to be able to give them some good answers, And the answers are, especially for like a school, your school's a safe place. Listen to your teachers during an event. They're going to tell you what to do. Try to find a place to hide. And you could talk to them about what to do to the event without getting into a lot of details to scare them, right? We talk about kids, what do you do if your shirt catches on fire? Stop, drop, roll, right? We don't get into all the things about what it would do to your skin. You don't have to be overly graphic. You just, hey, if this happens, stop, drop, roll, right? If you're at school and that alarm goes off, run somewhere and hide, wait for your teacher, the police are coming. But you can have that type of conversation without having to get into details that you would with an adult.
Your thoughts on sharing with children?
Yeah, I think Lieutenant Hart hits it right on spot. Is each child's different. Whether it's talking to your own children or talking to children at a school, there's certain areas you can get into. You have to be very sensitive to children. You have to talk on their level. It is important not to bring too many details into it. Be open and transparent with your kids at a level that they can understand. But we can get into all kinds of discussions with our kids. There's worldviews, right? There's how do we look at society today? What's going on? And how can they handle, what age group are they at to be able to understand what we're talking about? A 5-year-old's not going to understand the content I can talk to a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old. So it's just knowing your kids, and it's knowing what they're able to handle. As a parent, you should be in touch with your kids at what they can and can't handle. But I do agree with Lieutenant Hart here on teaching them those basic training steps that will become instinct. Stop, drop, roll. It's just a national slogan, but it sticks. Run, hide, fight. It's a national slogan, but it sticks.
And when you see something, say something.
See
That's
something,
what we've all
right.
been, I think people have been guilty of not really saying something when they see some craziness.
That's right.
Yeah, that's
Right?
true.
I mean,
No,
hey,
no, it's
we
true.
see it. We need
And
to
the-
say
And
something.
the reason why is because, number one, when people are going about their daily lives, they don't expect to see something like this, right? And number two, they don't. We have a psychological component where we start to create our own narrative to make it make sense of what we just saw. A couple years ago, there was a shooting in the state of Washington right outside one of the malls there. And the shooter drives there in his car. He's wearing all black, which we see a lot of active shooters do, wearing all black. He gets out of his car. He's kneeling down. He put a mask on, a hockey mask. He has a backpack on, and he's loading a rifle in the parking lot. So imagine that. Imagine the local mall you go to if you saw that. People walk by, go into the mall, and see him doing this, and continue walking to the mall. Didn't say anything. This is an extreme event, you would think. Obviously, he goes in the mall. He starts shooting. Some people died. Detectives were able to find these people, and they tell their story, the detectives. And the detectives go, "Why didn't you call 911?" And they said, "We thought he was there to play paintball, or, we didn't think anybody would come here to shoot at a mall." So people sometimes even see something that extreme and don't say something.
That's true.
So we're continually trying to get that message out, because for the police and the fire, we would always rather be called, and maybe it is a 12-year-old that has a paintball gun and really bad decision making and shows up that day. But call us right away so we can handle it sooner.
That's right.
And let you make the decision on,
Correct.
hey, he's playing paintball or this is a real gun.
Right, right, for sure.
You know, when we hear these different stories about the gunman in Texas, this guy should have never even been close to a gun. Our government, the Air Force, really dropped the ball on not getting the word out about this dude. He was a bad dude. Have you guys followed that? I mean, he had beat his wife, assaulted his stepchild. He had been in a mental institution for a year and escaped. How does this happen?
Yeah, I'll start really quick. I'm not privy to any law enforcement information for the investigation. I've only seen what's on the news. It seems like the Air Force has come out very early
To say,
hey,
we
we
dropped
made a
the ball."
mistake
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
We're doing an audit to check on our process to find out how that went through, because this shouldn't have happened. So that's good to see. But what we see here in this case specifically, I think is important, is that domestic violence many times follows people outside of the home into the places they go into the community. Right? And what we're seeing here now, it seems like, what we know, domestic violence kind of started there. This suspect's actions targeting that church have to do with people he knew who went there. And this is another example where you need a whole community approach, and the way that we handle domestic violence needs to be taken very serious all the time. We had a shooting here, and you'll remember this years ago in the city of Torrance, related to domestic violence, where a lady comes to work. It's Monday morning around coffee, and she tells her coworkers, "Hey, if my ex-husband comes to work today, be a good witness." And people kind of were like, didn't know how to handle that. And the manager's the one that heard this. And hours later, the ex-husband did come. He did kill her, and he killed himself. So this is an extreme example of how domestic violence follows people into workplaces, turns into active shooter events, and not just see something, say something, but if you hear something, say something. If you're at work, if you're at church, and you hear somebody make a comment like that, if my ex-boyfriend, ex-husband comes into the church today, comes into work today, be a good witness. What do you mean by that? Because I care about your safety and I care about my safety. And there are things the police department can do ahead of time to help kind of deter these types of incidents. But that's a great point.
With the things that have happened in the last 2 months, how has this affected the way you respond, the police department respond to certain calls?
So for us, we work very closely with the fire department because active shooter events are medical emergencies, right? They're a police problem, but they're also, and you just heard it, medical emergencies. So, we work every month. We do training, specialized training together with the medical team and paramedics, with our SWAT team, with officers. So we're making sure that's good. Every year we do walkthroughs with the school district to make sure that their plans are up to speed and we're all communicating the same level. So we're doing what we should be doing at the maximum capability that we could to keep the city safe. And I think what we're trying to do even more is just like this program, is that outreach to really educate more people, and then to tell business owners too in the city of Torrance and the South Bay, the public-private partnership for this type of event, you need a whole community approach. That means your city council, your police department, your fire department, your commerce, your business people, your chambers, your local place of worship all need to work together on this type of issue, because that's the only way we can address it, is a whole community approach.
What about schools? What about the school system?
So when it comes to schools, schools have done a good job of identifying safety plans. They do annual drills of doing what those plans are. So as far as like the schools here in the South Bay, I could speak for those directly. They have good plans in place. They have good communication. And especially for us in the city of Torrance, we've got a Torrance mental health evaluation team where we partner up with the county, a clinical psychologist. And when issues come up, because especially teenagers, when issues come up, we have to determine, is this person just acting out? Is this a real threat? And so we're bringing in professional resources to do that. So the schools are doing a great job of addressing this issue in a way that increases people's safety but doesn't cause fear.
I'm just curious, Assistant Chief, have people treated you differently after they heard that you got shot? I mean, what's been the reaction to your friends and your coworkers?
First of all, it's been humbling, but the thing that I've enjoyed is the reconnection. I've had people from junior high that I haven't contacted reaching out, and it's been a great chance to reconnect on some of those relationships. People have been so gracious, been very sensitive, and a lot of people are a little timid to bring it up. I have no problems talking about it one-on-one with people, just to give them, again, like I said, there's a connection, and people not only know who I am, but there's a lot of people in our community that were affected by this event. So the reaction's been, in some instances, has been comical by trying to go through a metal detector, but on the others, it's been very supportive from our community.
When people now are thinking about, because I know a lot of folks, they just don't want to go to these big venues anymore, and they don't want to, they have a real hesitancy to go to malls, and when you're going to the airport, what advice do you have for those folks? Both you guys, that's a question for both of you.
I have personal advice that we can't let this rip us off of our life. We've got to live our life. We can't live in fear. There is definitely a heightened level of awareness that we need to be aware of. Whatever venue you're at, whether you're at an outdoor concert, you're at a mall, you're in a movie theater, there's so many case studies of things that have gone bad that we do have to have that awareness of where our exit points are and where we sit in a theater if we have a choice. Mm-hmm. But my biggest message is you can't live life in fear. That allows the person to win. You got to go live your life. Increase your awareness. Have those talks with your kids and your family. Keep it on the forefront of your mind, but don't let it rip you off of the enjoyment that we can have. So.
Lieutenant, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, he's right on point with that. You look at the recent attack we saw in New York, and the city of New York galvanized together. They said, we're still going to do the New York Marathon. This is who we are as a people. We're not going to let an attacker like that win. And so, when it comes to going to big events, this is the same thing. Be aware of where your exit points are at. If you did see something suspicious, call right away. If you see a bag laying by itself and it doesn't make any sense, get a hold of the local security person, the first officer you see, and tell them so we can all work together. But don't be afraid to go out, to go to movies, to go to ballparks, to do things. And if you are, seek help to talk about it and work through those issues so you can live in your freedom and not have to live in fear, because that's what we don't want to happen, is to walk around with that fear.
Does the city of Torrance have resources for training for different businesses, and are they providing resources to the fire department and the police department for the kind of training we need?
Yeah.
Is that are they discussing that as we speak?
Correct.
Or has that been a part of the community discussion in the past few years, and more so in the last few weeks?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what's interesting about that is people are calling the police department and the fire department, hey, are you guys thinking about putting a program in place? Well, we've had programs for like 5-7 years addressing this. Well, why haven't I heard about it before? Well, just connect with us a little bit more. We've been putting that information out there. So we have lots of programs in place for schools, just for citizens in general, like through our Citizens Academy, where we give them some ideas about what to do for these types of events. And the same for like the drills we do, where we have people come in and learn how to respond to these events. So we're very active in that realm. We work very closely, specifically with the Chamber of Commerce, and giving training to the businesses that are available, of telling them what to do. So it's there, and the police department's a resource, and we just encourage people, whatever city they live in, get involved in your local government, contact your police department, your fire department, and connect yourself with the training, because I know they provide it.
Right. And then, a couple other programs that are provided to the community are the Community Emergency Response Team, CERT, which is for all risk hazard type disaster preparedness. Those are 3 8-hour classes, and those are given 3 times a year. And then we have a new program called Business Emergency Response Training, which is a 4-hour condensed emergency preparedness that will go into businesses that would like to have the training, and we'll talk to them on emergency preparedness. So that goes, I think that goes hand in hand with the active shooter training, different levels of involvement in the community and education.
I think I'm hearing both you fellows say we'd rather be safe than sorry. So if there is an issue with mental health, if you have a son or daughter or a parent or someone in the family that you think's really going off the deep end, I think it's safer. It's safe to say, call somebody, call the police, call the fire department, and say, "Look, we've got a problem here." Am I right, fellas?
No, you're right. I want to jump on what he said too about this. He got on a key word that we use in our industry that a lot of people don't understand: an all hazards approach. Right. So the training you're getting from the fire department, the police department, we're going to give you principles that apply not just to an active shooter event, but it could be if somebody was running around with a knife and trying to stab people. We're going to share with you first aid skills that you can use, not only if you trip and hurt yourself or burn yourself, but if you got shot or stabbed. So this all hazards approach is really, really important. When it talk about if you have a doubt about somebody in your family, you know, a lot of times there's embarrassment that you bring in the police department, the fire department sees it, and you may feel a little bit embarrassed that, oh, my family isn't as perfect as I make them seem on Facebook, because you're right. And in real life, sometimes it gets messy. But we can connect people the resources they need to get them on the path to being healthy and safe. And we can do it, if the earlier we do it, right, the better it's going to be for all of us. And that's back to, like, with the kids. We're talking about the conversations we have with our kids and how they're changing. I know when the kids transition to high school, not only am I connecting with them, but I'm asking them, hey, who's being picked on in your class right now? And who are the people that would be doing that? Are there other people in your class that are doing that we need? Because it's a whole community approach. But yeah, if you have those people in your family you're worried about, we have so many resources and people that are experts in getting people to safety, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally, that they really should reach out.
In closing, gentlemen, how do we move forward?
You know, I'll add, what you heard especially from the chief is when things like this happen, they happen fast. And if we don't give people good options about what to do before an event, they can't make good choices. So we need to continue to have dialogue about what to do during critical incidents. And the formula that we use, the fire department uses the same when they're training people, is knowledge increases confidence, confidence increases your decisiveness, and it's decisive action in a critical moment that saves lives. And decisive action could be if you see something, say something. Decisive action if you hear something, say something. And decisive action is in the middle of an event, what do you do? When do you run? When do you hide? And when, at what point, if you have to, do you fight? So really that education part of knowledge, confidence, and decisiveness, and a whole community approach.
Assistant Chief?
Yeah, this has been a healthy discussion. You know, I've been enlightened through Lieutenant Hart's comments. I think we take it one day at a time. We have a plan for the future, obviously, and the City of Torrance does have a plan. We are committed to being active in the community for training, answering questions, providing that level of leadership to make sure our people or in our community are well prepared for an event that may happen. But it's going to happen one day at a time. You know, we're still recovering from 3 tragic events in a month. And we want to be aggressive in addressing that and not let that time slip away. But get involved in your community. You know, get involved with requesting the police department, the fire department to come out and talk to your business on any issues you have questions about. That's what we're here for. That's what we train for. That's what we want to impart to you. We use social media. We go to schools and do station visits, school visits. They come to the station and have station visits. We partner with our public safety partners, the police department, to deliver that training. But it's gonna be a slow process, but the avenues are there, and we're looking forward to have those opportunities.
Thank you both so much for joining us for the candid conversation and information. You guys were terrific, and thank you at home for tuning in to watch this special edition of This Week in Torrance. If you have any questions about anything you heard today, or have questions you'd like to ask Assistant Chief Treskes or Lieutenant Hart, be sure to email us at thisweek@torranceca.gov, and we'll be sure to get those answers for you. I'm Ben McCain, and we'll see you again next time. Thank you. Great job, man.